Hello and welcome to our series Year 708 today. My name is John Reese and I'll be the host of the series. Last time, if you saw our broadcast, you know we did the layperson's guide on mental illness with Mr. Jerry Murphy. Today I've invited Jerry back to talk about the 708 Inc. Board, of which Jerry is the executive director. And Jerry, it's good to have you back with us.
Well, thank you. It's nice to be back.
Good. Jerry, could you begin by kind of sharing with our audience a little bit about your background and how it came that you became part of the Inc. Board?
Okay, sure. Actually, my education background is actually in building management or property management, and an opening became available with the Inc. Board because we own several buildings, and the executive director at the time, Dan Hanna, hired me. Now that was almost 26 years ago now, John.
Oh, wow.
And I worked with Dan for about 11 years, and then applied for his job when he decided to retire. So I've been lucky enough to be executive director for about 15 years now.
Wonderful, wonderful. Jerry, I would be willing to bet that the vast majority of our viewers today probably don't know what the mental health, mental retardation, or the Inc. Board really is. Could you kind of give us a brief overview of what the board is and what it does?
Sure. And you mentioned the old name that we had, Mental Health and Mental Retardation Services, and that's what it had been known for quite a while. And then about 7 or 8 years ago, we changed it to the Inc. Board just to shorten it up, and because most people recognize this as that anyway. And really what the Inc. Board is a separate not-for-profit, a 501(c)(3) that was set up to handle mental health funding for a partnership of 7 townships. There's actually at the time 6 townships here in Southern Kane County.
I see. You've been with the Inc. Board 25 years. Its history goes back prior to that. Could you share with us some of the history of what the Inc. Board is and how it came into existence?
Sure. Back in the 1960s, the state of Illinois passed what became known as the Illinois Community Mental Health Act. And it was actually House Bill 708. That's where the 708 comes from. A lot of people think that 708 was the old area code or something like that, but it was actually House Bill 708 that was the bill that started the legislation. And what the Community Mental Health Act did was it enabled local jurisdictions, either townships, cities, or counties, to tax themselves for the purposes of delivering mental health, developmental disability, or substance abuse services, and appoint a board to oversee the function of that tax levy.
So the members of the community actually voted this kind of special tax in?
Right. Back in November of 1970, the 6 townships in the lower 2 tiers of Kane County all voted it in by referendum. So this is a voter-approved, tax. And then in the year 2000, the township of Virgil passed the referendum, which up until recently had been one of the most recent successful 708. And then the Inc. Board, back again in the early 70s, was formed as a separate 501(c)(3) in order to oversee this partnership so that each township didn't have to do their own small thing.
Understood. So each township then taxes itself. That sounds like a pretty complicated process. How does that whole tax levy situation work with the Inc. Board? And
it can be a little bit complicated because you're right. Each township levies its own mental health tax, and the rates vary from township to township. Okay, but what happens is that the township mental health board that the town board has appointed, and that township mental health board consists of 6 citizens plus a member of the town board. They oversee and they get reports about how that tax levy gets used. And then each year, they also recommend the levy for the next year or for the following year. We're under the tax caps, so we're only allowed small increases anyway, one way or the other. But then, so the local people are recommending what the levy should be, for the next year, and then the actual town board does the levy, because in the way our tax levy system works here, it is always the elected officials that have the bottom line responsibility for levying taxes. and because they have the responsibility, they're responsible to the voters. So they actually say, and they can adjust it up and down, up within a certain margin or down. But we have had tremendous support from all 7 townships that we represent.
Okay. We're kind of in that tax season right now, and I looked at my last tax bill from months back, and I didn't see 708 on there. So I was wondering, how does that work?
Well, and you won't find it on your individual tax bill. What it is the mental health tax levy, because it is part of the aggregate township levy, is included in your township line. So everybody who lives in Kane County lives in a particular township, one of the 16 townships. And that township does an aggregate levy because they may provide other services. They usually have a general fund. They may do road and bridge. They do youth services, et cetera. So they may have several different line items, and we will be one of the line items within that aggregate levy.
I see. And then the Inc. board itself has a board of directors that I guess you report to?
Correct.
Tell us a little bit about that board.
And it is interesting. We have a board of 15 people, and they are the ones that have the direct oversight as far as talking about who gets the funding and who gets the money, et cetera. That board consists of 1 representative from each of the 7 township mental health boards that is selected by those boards to be their rep on the Inc. board. And then there's 8 at large, which can be any citizens that live within our 7 township area. So the actual decision-making part is done by the 15-member Inc. board.
Are those meetings open to the public in terms of the boards, how they do their work?
They are. We aren't. Well, let me break that up a little bit. The Inc. board, technically, because we're a 501c3, we're not required to have meetings open to the public. But we generally operate under the same rules as the township 708 boards, which is that's an appointed body supported with tax dollars, and they are subject to the Open Meetings Act. So basically, we operate our 501c3 the same as if we were just one of the individual 708 boards. People are always welcome to come if they want to see how the deliberations take place or how the decision-making process gets made. We always welcome citizens to come and watch if they want.
Sounds like there's a number of different layers to this thing, so it sounds like you have a whole bunch of bosses, not just 1 or 2 like most people.
Yeah, exactly. It's always interesting because between the 8 different boards, the 7 township 708 boards and the Inc. board, we actually have 56 board members who are citizen volunteers. I mean, we've got 56 people that help us do the planning and the funding decisions, et cetera. And they don't receive a dime in compensation. None of our board members ever receive anything.
Understood. And again, some of our viewers are down in Kendall County. Is there a similar type organization in the northern Kendall County area? Or?
Well, there is a 708 board. So they have a 7-member 708 board, and those people are all appointed by the county board or the county exec down there. And so they take in applications from agencies that want funding and then make the decisions, pass it back to the county board. The county board kind of puts its stamp of okay on it. Now down there, the situation is slightly different in that the county health department, which is Kendall County Health and Human Services, they actually provide a large bulk of the mental health and substance abuse services in Kendall County. So the health department actually receives some of the 708 funds also.
Understood. We're going to take a short break now, Jerry, because we've talked about how the money comes in. So after our break, why don't we start talking about how the money goes out?
Oh, that's the fun part. Okay.
At times, the path to recovery from a mental and substance use disorder may be unclear. At times, the path may be rocky. At times, the path may be wandering. But laying a strong foundation with the support of others makes all the difference.
Welcome back. Jerry, before the break, we said that we'd talk a little bit about funding. One of the things I've often heard you say is the kind of mantra about the Inc. board is local funding, local resources. Why is that so important?
Well, I think it's really important because mental health boards fund mental health, developmental disability, and substance abuse services, and a lot of times those can be very different from one community to the next. Aurora might be different from Elgin, or Batavia is different from Big Rock, et cetera. So as local as you can make it, and I think by doing it on a regional basis for us, Aurora, Sugar Grove, Big Rock, et cetera, that it allows us to really be as local as we can get as far as addressing issues.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure it's not going to come to a shock to anybody, but obviously Illinois is having some financial problems, and it seems like the social service, human services area has taken a bigger hit than even some other areas.
Yeah, I think human services and of course higher education, seem to be the big major areas right now. We're part of a statewide association of mental health authorities that, so we get regular publications, and I have to tell you, not hardly a week goes by that we don't hear about some facility or some organization having to close their doors because of the lack of funding from the state of Illinois. Whether it's a domestic violence shelter downstate or a substance abuse shelter in downtown Chicago. There are beginning to be a lot of casualties, if you will, when it comes to the system as a whole because of what's going on in Springfield. And as a result, our local money, even though it's not the same amount of dollars, our local money becomes that much more important.
More important because it's dollars that a local agency can count on and feel safe that they're going to get.
And those are really the agencies that are surviving, are the ones that have a diversified revenue stream. If that's the problem with a lot of those downstate agencies, is they're 80 or 90% dependent on state money, and if that dries up or goes away, then they don't have a lot of options. We're a lot luckier here, I think, in Kane County, in that most of our agencies have a very diversified set of revenue streams, from insurance to fundraising to a lot of other things.
Okay. So moving forward then, I've heard that you fund 19 different agencies and approximately 40 programs?
Correct, yes.
Now, I'm not going to ask you to name them all.
Good, because I'm not sure I can remember all of them off the top of my head.
Kind of some examples or ideas for our audience of what the Inc. Board does fund?
Sure, and I think, people would probably think of the more what I would call traditional, counseling agencies. Two of our major ones would be Tri-City Family Services in Geneva, because they serve largely our Batavia and our West Towns areas, and Family Counseling, that is located in downtown Aurora. That would be your non-seriously mentally ill, the counseling, like family relationship, mother, child, parent type relationships, kids that need, some education and guidance, et cetera. Those would be our more traditional agencies. But, we're also there to do substance use disorder services, not do them, I should say, we fund them. And we do that through places like Breaking Free, doing a lot of outpatient, counseling services there, or even residential services at Gateway Foundation. So we have a wide variety. And if I can throw into the developmental disability or IDD services also, and the Association for Individual Development is our major provider for that in our area. So those three major areas we try to make sure that we've got covered. As
I understand, one of the primary missions of the Inc. Board is to do planning in terms of what the future needs are in the local communities. How does that planning element of what Inc. Board does work?
Well, that's interesting because actually part of the Community Mental Health Act requires community mental health boards to do 3-year plans. So it makes you sit down strategically and at least once every 3 years do that. And we do that as kind of a collaborative effort as far as gathering information is concerned. You have to gather information in order to do any kind of strategic planning. And we do a lot of that along with the Kane County Health Department and the local hospitals. We also do our own surveys of provider agencies, our stakeholders like the townships. What do you see coming through your door? And our providers. Who's got the longest waiting list for a particular service, et cetera. And we gather all of that information together once every 3 years and come up with what we feel is a strategic plan to address those needs over the next 3-year period. But then we also go back and revisit that every year and do 1-year updates.
And you pull the agencies together and kind of are the catalysts for getting them to talk about what their needs are? And
we survey them, but we also, how can I put this? We can also tell by the statistics and things that we get back from them about where their greatest needs are. And they also take a certain responsibility for it because every year they have to apply for funding, and sometimes their priorities or their needs shift. If they have a program that, because there's a very good funding stream from another source, then they'll say, well, listen, we'd rather use some of your money if we can towards this where we don't have any funding. And that is our flexibility to be able to address, again, the local issues with our local money.
that can be really important for an agency to have that flexibility of where to move it for the local community.
Definitely, because so much money always comes with certain tags or markers on it. You can only be used for such and such.
Sure. You were telling me about the recent initiative that the Inc. Board did with Family Focus. Could you tell us a little bit about that one?
Yeah, and that actually came out of some of our strategic planning. Through the joint needs assessment that we did with the health department. What we found out through the survey that they did, and this was like a telephone survey plus forums around the city, was that there was a large number of people primarily on the east side of Aurora that didn't know what services were available or where to go for services. They were short the information that they needed, even if they thought they needed services. So what we have done with Family Focus is we started a pilot program this year doing community outreach to go out to the churches, go out to the schools in those areas and try to make sure that the families and the residents are aware of what services are available. And we actually modeled that on what we had done 20 years ago out here in the more rural area, what we call West Towns.
West Towns.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you about that, but maybe we can get back to that a little bit later.
Sure.
So the tax money comes in, and about how much revenue does the Inc. Board receive?
About $1.7 million a year.
And then you take that money and give it to the local agencies. How does that process work?
Well, we are part of what's called the Funders Consortium. Ourselves and United Way have a joint application process. And that way, agencies that get funded by either of us fill out the same application. And like I said, agencies can also change their needs, from year to year. So they will apply to us for what they feel they need in order to meet the needs of the clients that they have coming through the door. Now, I have to tell you, we seldom have enough money. Like this past funding cycle, we had a little over 1.4 million to give away or to give out, and we got $1,738,000 worth of requests.
Okay.
So we can't begin to address everything, but that's part of the process, as to how we make those priorities and determinations.
Okay. We're going to take another break, so when we come back, we'll talk to you a little bit more about that process, specifically how each agency gets its dollars.
Okay, that'd be terrific.
Okay, thank you.
Your path to recovery isn't like mine.
You have your own struggles with mental health issues.
Your own challenges with substance use disorders.
You also have your own abilities and strengths.
But when you need a hand,
Reach out until you find one.
So, Jerry, we were talking about funding. The money comes in, the Inc. Board gets it, and then specifically in the Inc. Board, how do you decide who gets what?
Sure.
Because there's not enough money to go around.
Yeah, there is not enough money to go around, so it's not just a matter of writing checks. What we do is we have a separate committee in the Inc. Board consisting of both Inc. Board members and some of our 708 board members from the townships. And what we do is after we have the applications in from the agencies, staff will do a 2 or 3 page summary for each of the 40 programs, and give those to the committee, the program committee, to review. And they get a chance to ask questions. We've tried to ask some before that. And then we look at the whole thing as a large grid and say, okay, here's what they got last year, here's what they're requesting this year, here's the changes that they've asked for, et cetera. And with always having our strategic plan in the background, which should be driving our decisions anyway, say, okay, well, here's what we can afford to do. Now, unfortunately, this last year our increase was 1.7%, so that was about what we were able to do for most of the agencies here or there.
Sure, sure. A difficult question. When tax dollars come in and go out, there's always a little that stays for administrative overhead. About what percentage of the tax monies that do come in stay as administrative overhead?
Our accountants figure that out every year because you have to, as a not-for-profit corporation, we have to file what's called the federal 990 and the state 990 form. And if you refer back to that, actually, our administrative overhead is about 8%, which for almost any not-for-profit is pretty good. We have a very lean not-for-profit, and we only have 3 staff people. So we do a lot in working with 8 different boards. So.
Sure. I know that the Inc. Board does have a web page, and the specifics of where money goes and how it gets spent, is that information available on the web page?
Oh, it definitely is. One of the things that we have really taken very much to heart is the fact that because we use tax money, and it's not donated money, it's money that people have to pay, is the transparency angle on it. I mean, we try to make sure that every decision, every dollar is transparent. We turn out an annual report. You can go on our website and get copies of the latest annual report. You can also go and see a list of the agencies, how much they receive, and then you can even get links to those agencies to see what services they provide. So transparency really is number one with us.
Great, great. Earlier in our discussion, you mentioned that you originally came to the Inc. Board because of buildings. The Inc. Board still owns those buildings, do they?
Yes, we do. We've got 3 buildings that were built back in the early 70s. There's the building at 400 Mercy Lane, and then we have 309 and 409 West New Indian Trail Court. Those are known as the Thompson Rehab Center and the Keeler Center. Now the 2 on New Indian Trail Court, those are leased to the Association for Individual Development, and they do day programming, and they have some administrative space there for their organization. And then the building at 400 Mercy Lane houses our offices. We donate an office to the local NAMI chapter, National Alliance Against Mental Illness. And then the rest of the building is leased to the Gateway Foundation, and they do outpatient therapy out of our portion of the building there. We do offer them those buildings to them because our mortgages were paid off for 20 years ago. So we offer those buildings to them at a discounted rate. And if they had to go out and rent buildings from landlord ABC, they would probably end up it would cost them almost $500,000 more. So by owning the buildings, we can contribute another $500,000 to the system by giving them discounted rent.
Just as good as real dollars, isn't
Just
it?
as good as real dollars when you're trying to keep the doors
terrific.
open, you bet.
That's terrific. Too, and earlier you had mentioned the western portion of Kane County and West Towns organization. I was intrigued by that.
Well, West Towns is kind of a term that we made up, actually.
Okay.
It refers to our 5 western townships, which would be Sugar Grove, Big Rock, Blackberry, Caneville, and Virgil townships. 20 some odd years ago when I first started with Inc., people from those very rural areas were very reluctant to come into Aurora for services, and what we really felt like that we needed was a specific outreach. So we have hired Conley Outreach Services, located in Sugar Grove and Elburn, and we actually established 2 satellite offices. We have one in Sugar Grove and one in Elburn, and that way if agencies want to provide some services right on site in that far western area, they can.
Very good. Again, with receiving tax dollars, the oversight responsibility, I guess, is kind of like the third leg of the stool of many of the things that the Inc. Board does. What's the oversight process like with agencies?
Okay. We require a lot from the agencies because we ask them for their financial statements. We ask them for client statistics. How many people did you serve? How many units of service did you get? We also require of them outcome measures. I mean, we don't want to know just how much got used. Were people better when they got out? What percentage? What were your goals in that regards, et cetera? And then we as staff report back to our 56 board members, so all 8 boards, about what results that we're getting. So it is, I'll tell you what, it is very fulfilling to be able to go into someplace like Sugar Grove Township, where I think the township population is probably in the range of 15 or 16,000 people altogether, and say, you know what, 658 people you received direct services last year using your money. And that makes a big impact, especially in the smaller townships.
Yeah. And I think that's really important. I think there was a time when social services were looked at as charity work. Mm-hmm. But now, receiving so many dollars from government, the ability to prove that what they're doing is making a difference is critically important for agencies.
Yeah, I think the two things, the transparency that we talked about before, and then the accountability. And we've really raised up that level of accountability over the last few years.
Sure. Sounds like the Inc. Board does a lot of work with just 3 staff members.
We do. Like I said, considering that we report to 8 boards, and that doesn't count all the 19 different agencies and all the other networks and stuff that we interact with in the community, because we want to be as much embedded in the community as we can be.
Let me ask kind of a forward-looking question. We've done a lot of history today.
Sure.
As you view the kind of the status of the social service network in our region, what do you see as the biggest changes and the direction that maybe it's heading in?
Mm-hmm. I think one of the biggest changes, because the stuff that we're talking about really falls under health care, whether we're talking about mental health, developmental disabilities, or substance abuse, it really falls under health care. And of course, the whole health care picture these days is kind of up for grabs. A lot of people qualified for services under the Affordable Care Act that weren't able to qualify before. So if the Affordable Care Act goes away, I think here again, our local money becomes that much more important, because not everybody has insurance, not everybody has Medicaid or has some other way of obtaining services. So I think that the local money becomes that much more important again.
Mm-hmm. If you were going to offer an opinion, where do you see the need for the future services growing the most?
Well, if I had, quote, extra money, if you will, and we were able to do that, I would actually like to concentrate it in 2 areas. Being a baby boomer myself, I have a great appreciation for the fact that I think our baby boomer population is going to be in need of a lot of services over the next 10 to 15 years. And we're used to having them, so I think it's going to be a very demanding population. So I'd like to be able to put more into mental health services for seniors.
For seniors.
Exactly. And the other end would be the exact opposite end of the scale, which would be mental health services for youth. Because if we can identify behavioral problems earlier with youth, whether it's behavior or mental illness or substance abuse or whatever, it's a lot easier to fix a 15 or 16-year-old than it is a 30-year-old that's had this condition for 15 or 20 years.
Excellent.
So I'd love to be able to spend more in both those 2 areas.
Jerry, I really want to thank you for coming in today and telling us about the work that the Inc. Board does and kind of this overview of the Social Service Network. One thing is for sure, the need's going to continue to grow and the dollars are going to continue to become harder and harder. So you got a lot of work in front of you. And
We do.
Thanks for coming in tonight.
Well, thank you very much for having me, John.
You're welcome.
I felt broken. I needed help for my addiction and depression, and help was there. I found support as I rebuilt my life, piece by piece. With the help of my family and recovery support community, I'm rebuilding my life. And through recovery, I am whole again.
Join the Voices for Recovery. It's worth it.